Hi. It's me, Brian, one of the owners here at Chrono and Cosmo. I slept here last night because I had a lot of work to do. And I still have lots of more work to do. So let's get started. Before we get into the topic of today's video, which is how I used to be the best card game player in the whole wide world, and then I got bad because I stopped playing so much, let's talk about how last week went at CNC. We had our first ever Summoner Skirmish for Riftbound, which was really, really cool because we had a long road to get here. Riftbound was like one of the first games that we had like players coming in for, but it took so long for us to get approved with UVS, which is the publisher that runs the game. It legit took forever. But we finally got approved, and then we missed out on skirmishes for the Spirit Forge season just by like, I think we were approved like 4 days after signups closed or something silly like that. But we got it, and then we had our skirmish on Saturday. It's like a tier 2 event for those of you who don't play Riftbound, so it's kind of like the next step up above like your regular weekly tournaments, and it had some cool prizes for it, like a champion exclusive promo and playmat. We had 12 players for it, which is it's like a little bit less than our regular weekly nights, which surprised me a little bit. I thought we would have gotten more people, but it was cool. Everybody had a really good time. Armando ended up winning on Diana, although most of you probably know him by his nickname, the Scourge of Fontana. Yeah, so that was really, really cool. What else happened last week? I don't know, man. The days just kind of blend together. Especially when you sleep here. Like, just who knows what time it is, dog. I forgot my little bag for my mail. Oh well, that's fine. I'll just stack them up there. Okay, so what's coming up this week? No, we'll get to that later. Let's talk about why we're here, okay? Let's talk about how I went from competitive card game player, who was also very, very handsome, to store owner who's not so great at card games anymore and has gotten progressively less handsome because I just don't have time to get a haircut. My competitive card game experience started with Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was like the first card game I was playing when I was like a kid, right back in like 2000, yeah, probably like 2001, 2002, I think, is when that was like my first card game, right? And I had Pokemon cards, but I wasn't really interested in playing the Pokemon card game. The only card games I wanted to play was Yu-Gi-Oh! And like there was this baseball trading card game. That one was kind of, I played it like twice, but I had like some baseball cards, but they weren't just like the regular collectible baseball cards. They're ones you could actually use to play a game. And I think Upper Deck was the publisher. I don't remember. Anyways, besides the point. So I played Yu-Gi-Oh! For a little bit when I was like a kid, until they banned the cards from elementary school. And then I stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I didn't come back to it until I had already graduated from high school and was going through my associate's degree in community college, which would have been, I want to say, like 2013. Yeah, 2013, 2014 is when I kind of got back into Yu-Gi-Oh! And I got back into it because I was playing Pathfinder, which is a tabletop RPG, with some friends. And I guess they were starting to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! And they had an idea like, oh, let's do a tabletop RPG campaign that also kind of like uses Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. I don't remember the exact details, but it was really, really cool and it was really fun. So we were doing that. And then from there on, I was like, well, why don't we start like playing the actual game? Like, let's go to, card game stores and participate in the actual game. So around 2014, I think it was 2014 or 2015 at this point, I built my first Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck since I was a kid, and it was the Evos. It was like the lizards and the dinosaurs and the dragons, and it's like they're an Xyz deck. So you take your lizard and then you evolve them into the dinosaur, and then you can do cool stuff. It was a pretty bad deck for the time, but it was my first deck, right? That I was like playing seriously in a card game. So I was having a fun time with it, but like I was getting stomped at locals, right? And part of it was because that I was using a deck that wasn't very good. And another part of it though was that I was still so new to playing card games in like a competitive sense that even though these were like casual like locals, I just didn't know the game well enough to know how to like play it at a like a competitive level, if that makes sense. So I started doing some research, started learning, watch YouTube videos, a little bit of YouTube back then. Mostly it was like speaking and training with players who were more experienced and better than me. And I was ready to get into my first like really competitive deck. And I think this was 2015 now. In the 2015 Megatins, Yu-Gi-Oh! Usually does like these Megatins at the end of every year, which have like the biggest hits of the last year or two. I was gonna build a Shadal's deck, which was this archetype. It was like weird. They were like evil creatures that turned other creatures into like their evil puppets. I don't know, it was kind of cool. That was the deck I was gonna build and play competitively, and I got all the cards from the Megatins. It was really, really budget friendly, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to compete. And then 2 weeks later, they banned the best cards out of the deck. So I never actually got the opportunity to really compete with that deck. And it kind of like really turned me off from ever wanting to build a meta deck ever again, at least in Yu-Gi-Oh! As we go farther into the story, I will be building meta decks for other games, but at least for Yu-Gi-Oh! I was like, no, we're not doing that again. I'm not going to build a deck just to have every card or the best cards in it get banned and make the deck not worth playing. So from then on, I kind of explored the idea of building my own sort of Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks with the intention of them being competitively viable, or at least playing rogue decks, right? In competitive terminology, you have like two categories of decks for the most part, which are like meta and rogue. Meta is an acronym, META. It stands for most effective tactic available. This typically refers to your most competitive decks. Whereas a rogue deck is any deck that you don't really expect to see when you go play at competitive events. They just kind of sneak in there. And you kind of have to be prepared to deal with them. So I was mostly playing rogue after that, and it really pushed me to learn what I feel like is the most important part of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! That still gets kind of overlooked to this day, which is the deck building aspect. Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular is a game that I feel, and I can say this having a handful of years of competitive experience with it, it really rewards knowing how to build a deck and having like a good macro strategy more than it does actually learning how to play the game turn by turn, just because the sequencing you can do in Yu-Gi-Oh! With a properly built deck is so powerful that your opponent will have a very, very difficult time interacting with it. And now this is a little temporal, right? This is kind of before like hand traps became a big thing, so you could kind of like stop your opponent's plays before you had anything on board with these hand traps. This was sort of before that era, but I do think it somewhat still applies, at least with my knowledge of how the game is, which I guess isn't the best anymore. But anyways, that's all to say that I started building these decks that were kind of left field decks, like things people really wouldn't really expect to show up at tournaments, like Magispectors, which were these cute animals that were indestructible, and they used the pendulum mechanic, and you could bring them all out, and they had like these busted spells and traps that you just like clown all over your opponents. I also played Paleozoics, which were the trap monsters, right? And they made the frog totally awesome. He was like this is the funniest Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. He was like two frogs, white frogs stacked on top of each other, and then with like a cherry on top. And he was supposed to be like, I don't know, supposed to be like a sundae or something. I don't know, but that card was busted, and everybody was terrified of it. And any deck that could play him, and his name was totally awesome, right? Like a pun. Any deck that could play him was just like really, really good. Anyway, so I played that deck for a while also. And I wouldn't go to like the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh! Events, but I did go to like LA regionals every time it rolled around, right? And those would be like 900 to 1,000 people. And I would consistently make day two. Right. I think the best I ever did in a regionals was probably top 64. Never really got past that, but I would get the invites to nationals, right? Wherever, I forget exactly where they would cut that off, but I did get nationals invites, and just never ended up going for Yu-Gi-Oh, because at that time I was kind of in between, what is it called? Community college and regular uni. I had my associates, but I wasn't exactly working a job that paid well enough for me to travel like that. So I never ended up traveling to nationals, but the best I ever did in Yu-Gi-Oh, it was the last deck I ever made. I basically figured out that you could use these fairy monsters that were completely overlooked for the most part. And this really, really old school insect monster. His name is Gale Dogra, for those of you who know Yu-Gi-Oh! And his effect is you can pay it's something crazy, like 3,000 life points to send one of your monsters from the extra deck to the graveyard. Like, who cares, right? When he came out, he was just a terrible card. But there's a really broken combo you could do with him in fairy decks that basically just made it so your opponent couldn't play the game. And no amount of hand traps they had could interact with it just because of different sequences. It was an unfair deck, basically. I would sit down from my opponent, right? We would roll to see who goes first. And if I went first, there was a 75% chance I just win on my first turn because I locked them out of being able to do anything and they just can't play the game. And if I didn't land that combo, I just play the game normally, and a lot of times I would still win. And then because Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a best of 3 format, what I would do is I would win game 1, right? And then in game 2, the loser gets to choose if they want first or second. So my opponent would say, okay, I'm gonna go first. I would immediately concede without even playing out the game. I would be like, all right, I surrender, you win. Because I knew that game 3, I would get to choose that I would get to go first. And then there was a really, really good chance that I was just going to win on the spot. And, that would save me lots of time, right? When I would go to these big Yu-Gi-Oh! Events, I would be done with my matches in 20 minutes, whereas all my buddies were usually going up to the full 50, 55 minutes for the round. And I would be getting my lunch and my chicken tenders, right? And I'd be like, oh, that's crazy, man. You guys' games are taking so long. What's going on? But anyways, that's the last deck I ever built for Yu-Gi-Oh! And it was good. It was a really, really strong deck. I went to Anaheim YCS, which is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship series of events, and I crushed it day 1. I don't even remember how many rounds we played. It was something like 10 or 11 rounds. I think I only dropped 2 rounds. So I absolutely just crushed it. And I got my end of day 1 prizing, because they do that in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is really weird. You line up and they give you your end of day 1 prizing before you show up for day 2. And all of my buddies that I had gone with, none of them had records good enough to advance to day 2. And we had carpooled up together, and we were going on the car ride home, and I was kind of talking to them like, oh, are you guys gonna come for day 2? You gonna do side events or just hang out or whatever while I'm playing? They're like, I don't know, man, we're not gonna go. And then I thought, you know what? Even I'm not having that much fun with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I had distilled, the gameplay down to a point where, because of the way I had built my deck and the combo I had come up with, I wasn't really playing the game. The game was just kind of playing itself for me. Ultimately, it was basically just a dice roll simulator. So I didn't show up for day 2. I just didn't go. And that was kind of my last experience with competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I probably could have gone a lot farther. I probably would have eventually hit a wall, just because although my deck was really, really good, believe me when I say even that kind of thing I just talked about was not the strongest decks Yu-Gi-Oh! Were capable of. But it kind of showcased that in that game, you build a deck from really understanding kind of the principles of how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works. And then it doesn't even necessarily matter if other people are playing the meta decks. If you have that kind of elite ball knowledge, shall we say, you can just stomp them, because the amount of deck building possibilities in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are so insane that nobody can ever fully conceptualize what the most busted, broken combos are at any given time. So anyways, I stopped Yu-Gi-Oh! From there. But that wasn't the end of my TCG playing career, because at the time it was probably I want to say 2017, and I moved on to a new card game. And the next card game I found was the Final Fantasy trading card game. And no, I'm not talking about Magic the Gathering's Final Fantasy set, which only came out like, what, last year or something like that? No. Final Fantasy has its own trading card game. You've never heard about it because they don't advertise it at all. But the only way I knew about it is because I was playing Final Fantasy 14 at the time, and I admit I was using Reddit at the time. I know, disgusting. Trust me, I don't use it anymore. But using Reddit at the time, and somebody had made a post like, hey, look at this cool, Final Fantasy 14 card in the Final Fantasy trading card game. And I was like, oh shoot, I didn't know this had a trading card game. So the first set was going to be coming out. And they had done a Final Fantasy trading card game before, but I believe it was Japan exclusive, and it kind of didn't do really well. And they called that Final Fantasy TCG the Chapter series, okay? It was being re-released with a global launch as the Opus series. So I decided to get into that. And at the time, I was actually going to four-year university now, so I was broke. I could not afford cards to save my life. I was a student full-time, so I had no time to work or anything like that. And I was just playing budget. And the first set of the game, the power level of the cards was really, really imbalanced. So a budget deck wasn't able to get very far against like a real deck. But luckily, there was such a shortage of the cards that the real meta decks were outside of the reach of most people's wallets anyways. So in spite of the fact that I was using a budget deck, and like when I say budget, like I'm talking budget. In Final Fantasy TCG, they have these units which are called standard units. They're not like your named characters. So it's not like Cloud or Lightning or Sephiroth or, any of those guys. They're literally just like, this is a Dragoon, this is a Warrior, this is a Black Mage, like your super, super generic units, right? And my early decks in that game were all focused around using those units. And some of them were vanillas, right? There was Monk. He was one of the best cards in my deck. He cost 2 resources to play, and he had 6,000 power, which was a completely like on-curve, flat vanilla unit. But I played these other cards that like made my standard units more powerful, and that actually made them somewhat of a threat. So even though I was basically playing like this budget jank, my knowledge and skill with card games by that point was good enough to the point where I was able to get wins in at local events. There weren't any like really big competitive events for Final Fantasy TCG yet at that time, but there were a bunch of guys who kind of put together their own championship circuit called Meta Potion. And in the Meta Potion events, I would do okay. I would pretty routinely get top 8 or close to it, but I don't think I ever won one just because my deck wasn't good enough, quite frankly. But my skill as a player did kind of help me overcome like things in the Swiss rounds, and I would get to top 8 and usually lose in the first round of top 8 anytime I made it to top 8. But that was a lot of fun. And as I graduated and I was able to get my a career, I was able to start building better decks in Final Fantasy TCG. And I did get invited, well, I don't think it was invited. I did play at the first ever national championship for FFTCG in the United States, but I think it was open invite. So I don't know if that really counts. And I think also on that day, I had to leave early because I had like a class project or something. But, and no, I did not do well that day. But as time went on, I would say just before COVID, I had built like a really solid deck using like, I think it was before COVID. Maybe it was just before or just after, but I built a really solid deck using like Rydia from Final Fantasy IV, the Summoner, and then Palom and Porom, who were also from Final Fantasy IV. And it was like a pretty strong deck. And I was able to do pretty well at any event I could get to with those. Again, nothing super big, but we would have like local tournaments. Meta Potion, I think, had stopped running by that point. But, there would occasionally be like a 1K event, right? Or some other kind of tournament. And I would do pretty good. I don't think I ever got first at any of these tournaments, but I would, routinely get like top 8 or close to it. And there were a couple where I actually got like second place. So that was pretty cool. And these would be like probably, I want to say 20 to 30 man tournaments. Maybe some of them more on the lower side. But some of them would be decently big. And the TO would like rent out like a conference room in a hotel to host them and stuff like that, which was pretty cool. I think that was just before COVID, because once COVID happened, the amount of work I was getting in my career as a assistant editor in reality TV, it started exploding. And I just did not have much time for card games at all. But as things started to calm down, I did get into another card game. I kind of dropped FFTCG, and because when I did have time to play, like there weren't a whole lot of stores running it, and there weren't a whole lot of events for it. But I'm totally losing my train of thought because I can't find. There it is. I got into a card game next called Flesh and Blood, which is still my favorite card game to this day. And holy moly, there are so many Flesh and Blood events. It's constant. Like if you're a Flesh and Blood competitive player, basically every single weekend of the year, there's like either a local event for you to go to as part of like their Road to Nationals or Pro Quest season, or you can fly out to like a major event, like what they call their calling level events, which can be anywhere from like 500 to 1,000 people. Well, maybe they're a lot on the lower end now, but back then they would be like massive, right? And there would be one of those literally every weekend somewhere in the world. So I had a lot of fun being a competitive player in Flesh and Blood. And I think this is the game where I would say I kind of did the best competitively out of any other card game. Because even though with like Yu-Gi-Oh, I was getting like, I think with the YCS example, I was in like the top six. Well, I didn't play day 2, so it doesn't really count. But like with the regionals, I'd be getting like top 64 out of like 1,000 players or 900 players, right? Like obviously that's pretty good. But I think my skill as a player, it wasn't really there. It was mostly just the deck that was carrying me and sort of like how I had built the deck. So on the deck building side, I had that as a competitive player, but not so much on the gameplay side yet. And Final Fantasy, I think, didn't really get me there, just because for the most part, I was kind of playing with like, a deck of mostly vanillas and just doing like really, really good numbers, which doesn't really teach you how to interact with your opponent in a really skillful way. But with Flesh and Blood, like that completely changed, because Flesh and Blood is constant interaction. Sure, there are better decks than others when it comes to meta, and I didn't start out playing a meta deck, but I did start out playing a very skill-intensive deck, Kano. And for those of you who don't know, the way Kano works is that as you're playing the game, you are putting cards from your hand onto the bottom of your deck. And it's a 60-card deck. And you are doing that in an order that allows you to basically instantly kill your opponent when those cards come back around, because you're putting them back into your deck at a certain order. But the tricky thing is, you don't get to kind of look at your deck and see where they are. So while you're doing this, you are constantly counting how many cards in your deck you are away from like drawing your kill combo, while also trying to block and interact with everything your opponent's trying to do with you. And then like remembering like, okay, how many cards am I away from my combo? And then when you get there, you also have to kind of remember like, okay, what else is in the rest of my deck in what order? Because Kano, his whole thing is that he would play cards blindly off the top of his deck. But if you knew what was on top of your deck, because you've been counting the cards, it's not blind, and you can do some really crazy combos with that. So the most skill-intensive deck I've ever played in any card game, and I was okay with it. But the great thing about Kano was that if you were okay with it, you would still perform pretty well. And for a lot of like the tier 2 events, like your Nationals qualifier events or your Pro Quest qualifier events, I would usually end on a positive record or sometimes even make top 8. But I had a lot of bad matchups, and again, like that deck was extremely skill intensive, and I never quite got to the level of pro with that deck. But later on, I moved on to another deck, an Ice Wizard. Her name is Icelander, and I was doing really, really well with that. Well, there's like I don't know, I feel like some dust fell in my eye or something. I was doing really well with that deck, and I started to again start to perform better. I went to a couple bigger events, did okay, never made top 8 at any of the bigger events. But I think the part where I actually had like the best part of my entire career as a competitive card game player was there was a calling in Los Angeles. And again, a calling in Flesh and Blood is like, these are like really, really big events, like hundreds of players. And it was happening at the same time as the Pro Tour. So the Pro Tour event was an invite-only special event in Los Angeles. And then they would do the calling on the side, so that way everybody was come. So if you got invited to the Pro Tour, you play in the Pro Tour. If not, you play in the calling. I did really, really well on this calling. And it was using a deck that was not a meta deck also. I kind of went back to my Yu-Gi-Oh roots and kind of designed something for a hero, because Flesh and Blood is a hero-based card game. I designed something for a hero that was not a popular hero at all. For those of you who know Flesh and Blood, it's Uzuri, the assassin, and this was at the time of heavy hitters meta, so KO was kind of like the big boogeyman, or Victor. And I had designed this deck, and in Flesh and Blood, for kind of like the non-meta decks, you usually have like these niche communities, like Discord servers usually, where people kind of like try to make the deck good. And they can be very, very unimaginative, right? Usually you'll have somebody make a deck, they'll perform relatively well with it, and that'll kind of be like the go-to version of the deck and everybody uses it. But I took this deck in a different direction to the calling in Los Angeles. I made some different choices with it that I thought were really, really good. And everybody in that like smaller community disagreed with me. And they were like vicious about it too. They were like, oh, there's no way this can be good, blah, 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 blah. So-and-so played it this way and they did well. You're doing it wrong. You know, you're not going to do well, whatever. And as it so happened at that calling, I played against one of the people that was very, very vocal about, you know, how my deck was the wrong recipe, so to speak. And I knew it was them because they were not anonymous in that Discord server. Like a lot of people like really attached, like not necessarily their real names, but, you know, with a little bit of internet sleuthing, you could find out who was who, because they weren't that concerned with staying anonymous. I was anonymous, right? So my opponent didn't know it was me. But I knew, you know, it was them. And we play the game, and it's a mirror match, right? So we're both using the same deck with my different choices versus, you know, their different choices. And I just wiped the floor with this dude. I mean, it's savage. And he talks to me after and he's like, oh man, you know, I didn't realize that, like, you know, this hero could be built this way. Like, you know, I didn't think this would be, you know, a good type of deck. And I was like, oh yeah, man, who could have thought? So that was really vindicating. But that event ended with me with making day 2, which was really, really good. And then in day 2, the competition was fierce. If you've never been to a multiple day event, a trading card game, the way Swiss style pairings work is that you'll typically play against people with the same record as you. But when you get to people, like tournaments with like hundreds of people, it will take a while in the pairings before you start going against the people who are truly good, just because random draw. You might get lucky and start running into like the pro players like early on, but typically it doesn't happen, right? So on day 1, I was mostly going against like people who were like me, where maybe they were pretty good at card games, but they weren't necessarily like pro level. And on top of that, because it was also there was like the actual pro tour happening at the same time, most of the pro level players were not participating in this tournament. But there were still a lot of really, really good players who just unfortunately weren't able to make it into the pro tour. They're participating. So day 2 comes around, and I have the pleasure of playing against 2 individuals from the Hong Kong pro team. For Flesh and Blood, Hong Kong has their own, well, I guess it's not like the state team, but it's like there's a very, very prolific pro team in Hong Kong called Blue Pitch. And while I think a couple of their members did end up making it into the pro tour, a few of them didn't, and I had the pleasure of getting to play against them in the calling. And the first guy I played against, like, I destroyed that dude. It was so bad. And he was playing the deck that allegedly was really, really good into mine, but maybe he made some different choices with it because he just didn't expect to play against, you know, the deck I was playing, since it was, again, kind of like a, you know, on the down low kind of hero that not a lot of people were paying attention to. And I like destroyed him, dude. And it was savage. And I felt so good about it too. Like I was trying to be as like graceful and humble I could in the moment, because like I didn't want to be like, oh my gosh, I beat a member of Team Blue Pitch. You know, like I didn't want to be like that. But like he was a super chill dude. We had a great time, and it was like really, really cool. I think that was probably the first moment where I actually went up against like a pro player, right? Someone who actually gets paid to, or not necessarily paid, but sponsored to go to these events and perform really well. And, you know, he's got the jersey with like his sponsors on it too. Like that was the first time where I kind of like, this is not the first time I went up against a pro player or actually like, you know, beat them, but that's the first time where it was an annihilation, dude. So that was a really good feeling. And then the next round I got paired into one of his teammates and the reverse happened. He destroyed me. But still, I finished up the day, and by the end of the day, I think I finished 22nd place. It was either 20th, 21st, or 22nd. I don't remember exactly, but that was so cool. That was actually the best I've done in any massive event in any card game. And I felt like had I kept up with my practice and like, you know, kept playing and stuff, going to future events, I probably could have done even better. Not too long after that, it was the same year actually, I did win an invitation to the national championship for Flesh and Blood that year. And the event that I participated in that got me that invite, I was so close to getting first, but sadly just barely came in second at the end, playing, you know, that same deck, that Uzuri deck. And then for the national championship, this new set had come out. It had a new hero that I was really, really excited to play. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I can figure out how to build this hero, and I'll take this deck and catch people by surprise, and it'll be really, really good. And then at the national championship, that did not happen. I completely misread how the deck was supposed to build. My deck was just not very good at all, and I scrubbed out on day one, not even making it to the draft portion of the event. Or maybe I did draft, but I was just like, there was like no hope. I don't remember. And that was kind of like, I would say probably a wrap on my competitive TCG experience. I did have opportunities to play at bigger tournaments in the future, but I just started running out of the time as work kind of, you know, came back up, and then you know, I was dating, and then I had gotten married, and you know, I flew out to a couple more tournaments. There was I believe it was a calling in Minneapolis that I flew out to. Didn't do great, but you know, just in Flesh and Blood, that is what happens when you don't put the time and practice in. It's just a lot harder to do well, because that game, man, that game is so skill intensive. If you're not constantly practicing at your local game shop, like every week, like trying new things, talking to other people, seeing what you can do to improve your strategy in your deck, you are going to fall off, and you are going to fall off hard. It is not like riding a bike. You got to be constant in that game. The last game that I was thinking about getting into competitively was Riftbound. At the time, Flesh and Blood was still my favorite game. It still is to this day. But I just didn't have as much time to invest into Flesh and Blood to be as good at it as I wanted to be. So I had mostly just, you know, I was playing it casually. But Riftbound was coming out, and I'm not a huge League of Legends fan, but all my old friends from the Final Fantasy trading card game who didn't get into Flesh and Blood with me, they were all going to go into Riftbound. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try it too. And I had pre-ordered all the product I wanted, and I was super stoked. And then by the time of product release was releasing, I was basically out of work in Hollywood, needed something else to do. I was trying to do IT stuff like I talked about in 2 videos ago. And that's when Giovanni said, hey, we're opening up the card store. And I no longer had any time to practice card games competitively. And when you don't have the time, you do fall off, right? It's not just Flesh and Blood where if you're not practicing constantly, you're not going to be good at it anymore. A lot of these other card games too, it's hard to be good at them if you don't keep up practice. Like Riftbound, for example, when we first opened up the store, and I would sometimes have time to play against, my customers, like, oh man, I was wiping the floor with these guys with my Riftbound deck. It was really good, but they practiced a lot more than I did. You know, I no longer had time to be playing occasional games or like sit in for a tournament or anything. And they leveled up, man. Our Riftbound players here now, they're good. And I can't wait until they start to go to competitive events. Cause like from what I got to see during our skirmish event, like these guys know what's going on. They're doing some really, really, they're showcasing a mastery of the game, like a high degree of mastery of the game with the different plays they're executing in their different macro and micro strategies. So I honestly like Armando, please go to regionals or whatever tournament it is that you got the free win for, since you got first place at our skirmish. Like, please go, dude. I need to see your name up there in the standings, right? I need to be like, that's our boy. That's our Scourge of Fontana. You know, and the rest of you guys, you better go too, because you're going to do well too, even if you didn't get that first round bye. Yeah, I miss it. I miss playing competitively. It is so much fun. I mean, maybe Yu-Gi-Oh's not that fun competitively, but you know, the other card games I did play competitively, like, you know, they're so much fun. And you know, if I end up having time in the future, I would love to get back into it, but I don't really see that being a possibility. So I will live vicariously through my players as they carry the torch and go on to do well at these tournaments. And yeah, I would love nothing more than for some big tournament to happen for any of the games we carry, and to see one of our players like in the top 8, right? I think that would be such a cool thing to see. So that being said, if you love competitive card games and you don't want to get washed up like me, come on by Chrono and Cosmo and play with our guys sometime. And you know, you guys can all level up together. And like, oh, this is something too. While I was a competitive player, something that was so important is that after any tournament, all the guys I had gone up with, we would always go get Korean barbecue together. And that was almost as much fun as playing in the actual tournament. It's like, oh man, you know, I'm 0 wins, 3 losses, I'm gonna drop out, but Korean barbecue at the end of the day is gonna be lit, right? So that was always fun. And if you're a competitive player and you're going to these events, you need to do 2 things, right? These are 2 things you might not have thought about, but you need to do these, right? Number 1, you gotta link up with your homies, okay? If you know other people who play the game, or like the locals, you know, you go to once a week, the other people you play with, you guys got to coordinate going together. You don't have to carpool if you don't want to, but you should absolutely go to events together. It makes competitive events way more fun, and it'll also help you improve as a player, right? Because sometimes your buddy will finish, you know, his game before you do, and he'll come over and watch you play, and then, you know, maybe you lose your game, and then after your game, your buddy tells you like, hey, I saw where you made the misplay, it was this, and you learn for next time, right? So that's super important. But also, like, you need to go with your homies, and after the event, you all have to go out to eat together. I was trying to tell our guys about this after the skirmish. Like, you do not make plans after the day of the event. Your plan is that you and the homies are getting together and you're going out for food. Doesn't have to be all you can eat Korean barbecue, although I highly recommend it because that was my favorite. But you gotta go out together because you guys are friends, and these are like the bonds you wanna form, right? The friendships you wanna make that extend beyond just the card game itself. Because like, even my friends, right, the ones that I don't get much time to play with anymore, you know, we're still friends and we still talk because we built those bonds after the games. We'd go out for food together, we talk about life, you know. A lot of those guys, I almost all of them, in fact, were invited to my wedding, right? And I was invited to some of their weddings, and we hung out and stuff like that, right? Competitive card games are not just, you know, a path to like developing your skill as a card game player, but also it's a pathway to making great friends for life. What's going on at Chrono and Cosmo this week? We have the release of Dragon Ball Super Fusion World Booster FB10. This is very exciting. This is the first time we're gonna have Dragon Ball Fusion World booster packs at Chrono and Cosmo. People have been asking for them forever, and we're finally gonna have it. Also, we have Magic the Gathering Marvel Superheroes pre-release on Friday and Saturday. That is very, very exciting. Squirrel Girl is coming. You guys better be ready for Squirrel Girl. That's all I'm gonna say in this video. Thanks guys. I am going to get through the rest of these orders off camera. Hopefully I'll have another video for you guys next week. And let me leave you with a question. What's your experience playing card games competitively? Or have you ever? Have you always wanted to but haven't gotten into it? Maybe you need a hand getting into it, in which case I would love to help you get started with becoming competitive for whatever card game you play. Or is it kind kind of like scared you and you know, you're like, oh, I don't want to take it so seriously. Like what's your experience, right? Talk to me, let's have a conversation. Can't wait to see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.